Shane Tutmarc, Seattle, Washington, 19. Dolour was the name of the band, and there was probably somewhere near 100 people that were in the band at one point or another. It was essentially a solo project where I brought in different musicians in the studio or different musicians on stage, and so many great musicians that ended up going on to really great things too, like Eric Hawk, who's now in Portugal the Man, was our lead guitar player. He played on some of the records and was our live guy for a long time, and Robin Pecknold from Fleet Foxes even did like Dolour's last full US tour as our bass player when he was 18, about a year before he started Fleet Foxes. And just, you know, every local band from the Lashes to the Divorce to Vendetta Red to the Catch to Wonderful and United Stable Electronica, all were part of Dolour at some point or another. Well, when I first was starting Dolour, I didn't know any bands that weren't punk bands or hardcore bands, and that was kind of the scene I was in as well. Like all my friends were, like I went to high school with the Blood Brothers, who started super young as well, and so every show I would be going to was like hardcore shows and moshing and all that kind of stuff, and it almost felt more rebellious to me and more punk rock to me to make a pop band in the middle of all that, and it was fun because then players that would play with me that were typically in punk or hardcore bands would always be like, man, it's so much fun to play your music because it's like melodic and catchy, and I'm used to just playing like power chords and screaming the whole time, you know, so it kind of became this like alternative to alternative music, you know. But then there was a lot of things starting to happen at the same time, like Death Cab for Cutie started around the same time, and we played some early shows with them, and little by little it seemed like this whole indie pop thing really like out of nowhere became like the predominant sort of sound of that period of time, at least in Seattle, and so it was cool to kind of be right in the middle of all that. It's funny, my parents listened mostly to like sort of soft rock 70s stuff which I really thought, like by the time I was starting to get into music myself, I really thought that stuff was just terrible and that I didn't want anything to do with it. But I think it really informed, you know, when I look back on it now, like, you know, all those songs have real lush major 7 chords, and like the Carpenters and ABBA and Bread and stuff like that. Later, you know, I was able to kind of see how that influence did come through. But you know, even, you know, I guess just getting into the Beatles when I was young, and Nirvana, and even the kind of more punk or emo hardcore bands that I was into, like bands like Sunny Day Real Estate, there was always like a strong sense of melody in pretty much anything that I gravitated towards. My parents showed me the movie Amadeus, the movie about Mozart, and I mean, I was probably like 5 or 6 or something like that, and I think the fact that Mozart wrote music when he was 5 or 6 years old, I think was a huge part of it to me, as I felt connected with him and wanted to be like that, and that was like kind of my first introduction to like what a rock star was. I mean, the way he's portrayed in that movie, he's, you know, such like an 80s rock star vibe, you know, with his like pink wigs and everything, and it was almost like Prince as Mozart or something like that. But then like a babysitter played me Elvis for the first time when I was about 9 or 10, and you know, that blew my mind. And then a friend in 5th grade got me into the Beatles, and then I discovered Nirvana. And so really as soon as I could, I, you know, was writing songs. I would like tell my mom, I would sing melodies to my mom and have her write them out for me on like sheet music, you know, so it felt like real, you know. That was like my first version of what like a record would be. And then I had a tape recorder and I'd sing songs and do it. And then probably around 4th or 5th grade, after getting into Elvis, my dad got me an acoustic guitar and showed me how House of the Rising Sun, and that was the only song he ever showed me, but it has a lot of good chords in it, so I kind of took it from there, and then really started taking songwriting seriously at about like 6th grade. So it's hard to say if there was ever a moment where I didn't really think about, at least the arts. I was also like painting and drawing and making movies, and the art thing, whatever it was going to be, it was definitely going to be art. Yeah, there's a local label called Sonic, or a local in Seattle label called Sonic Boom Recordings, and they actually put out like the early Death Cab records too, and a number of local bands. They ended up putting out the United States Electronica record, the first one that I co-wrote with them, and they had actually been interested like in an EP that I had made like about a year before that. And so we had been talking with them for a bit, but we ended up deciding to record a whole new album. And I remember they were kind of like a little bit disappointed with it. It wasn't like, it didn't sound really anything like the EP that they had really loved of ours. So thus begun the journey of disappointing indie labels. Dolour had been in various forms for about like four or 5 years by the time that album came out, and we'd already gone through a number of different sort of sounds. I mean, we had periods that were sort of more like prog rock, like Zeppelin-y, or like Yes. I mean, it was probably more like Yes, because we would have songs that would have like 3 movements in them and stuff. And so what happened with the first record was we went to the producer that we had hired, Blake Westcott, with all these crazy songs that all had like 10 parts in them and stuff. And I remember actually like Dave Bazan from Page of the Lion was supposed to play drums on that record. And after getting the material for like a week and rehearsing them and stuff, he calls me. He's like, man, I just don't even understand these songs. Like, these songs don't even make any sense to me. And so we got a different drummer. But what we ended up doing, suddenly I wrote this song called Cleopatra Eyes, and that was kind of the first like sort of pure pop song that I had written. But we were just coming out of this really like progressive rock, riff heavy, sort of Zeppelin inspired period where all the songs had like 1 million parts. And so what the producer did was like kind of help us. He's like, why don't you take this little part of the song and make that the song? Or why don't you take this? So that first Dolour record really is like, there's 3 or 4 songs that all used to be part of one song, and almost every one of those songs, other than Cleopatra Eyes, sort of came out of different ones. So that's a weird record for me to like look back on, because I was sort of reapproaching or really approaching for the first time like sort of more like pure songcraft writing, but coming at a point of like taking all these jigsaw puzzles from these songs that we had written and trying to turn them into like more like regular sounding songs or whatever. So that's a hard record for me to really listen to. I mean, some people tell me it's still their favorite album of mine, and that blows my mind, because to me all I really hear is just like, it was a really hard record to make. And I think with our next record, I was really determined to be a great songwriter and to be a great musician and to really take more of the control over the production. So I reached out to somebody that I had known from the time I was like 14 on, Aaron Sprinkle. And initially, we started recording it only about like 4 months after the first record had come out, and just, really determined to be super hands-on with, I essentially, between me and Aaron, we pretty much played almost everything on that record. I also had Phil Peterson doing strings and some harmonies on it as well, and some trumpet. And then we just called in different people for drums or different things. But it was, it was the first time really feeling like, okay, I have a grasp on like what kind of sounds I want, what sort of vibe I want, like what sort of atmosphere I want in the studio. And Aaron was just great to work with, because like really any idea I came up with, like he could find a way to make it work. And so, we're both credited as producers on it, but it was like he really gave me the gift of of just helping me realize those visions and those dreams and making it all happen. And then I was able to go on to the next record, New Old Friends, and produce it myself, and feel pretty comfortable about what I was doing and what kind of sounds that we needed for the songs. Yeah, so from New Old Friends, and then I did like 2 separate records, the extremes on either side of what Dolour was all about. There was one that was like a super aggressive guitar heavy album, and one that was like a kind of more piano based. And those 2 albums ended up getting put into one album called The Years in the Wilderness, and those records were sort of just left, in the vaults until this Japanese label, Keens Records, who had previously put out like a sort of like best of collection in Japan, like about a year or 2 before. So that last Dolour record ended up coming out after the first Traveling Mercies record, even though it was like at that point 2 or 3 kind of years old. At the time, it just felt like, I didn't have anything to compare it to. So it was like, the only times I could really get a gauge on what was happening was just hearing other people say wow, that's great that this is happening or that's happening. And, but it was hard for me to really get a gauge on that. And I think the fact that it wasn't like really like a real band, like I didn't have people in it with me. So it was hard to kind of get that gauge like you would with a band of like, can you believe this? Like, we'd play on the radio and stuff, but it was like people that were, less invested, than a normal band. So it was really tough to like even understand what was going on. I mean, I had such big ambitions, and like, I mean, I really believed like that I was going to be like the next Beatles or something like that, like from a pretty young age. I just felt like I didn't have any doubts at all, and so even though great things were happening, it was more of a feeling of like, why aren't they happening faster or bigger or like, and so it was only later when, having heavier and deeper moments in life, kind of look back and realize how amazing, the things that did happen were, because I think at the time I was really, wanting more and more and more, and there was a ton of people around me too, like at different points, like lawyers or managers or whatever, that were always sort of building me up and setting my expectations even higher, so there was just a ton of like, you guys are the next big thing kind of stuff with every record of Dolour, and so at a certain point it was I had to like completely redefine my definitions of success, or like what the goal really was, because I'd seen other bands getting signed to majors and then getting dropped immediately, or bands reaching successes that I was jealous of, but then them completely falling apart or whatever, and so I started realizing that really shouldn't be the goal, and that really wasn't the goal. I mean, it was always more of a creative goal really for me, but I just had like the stupid notion that creativity and hard work equaled success, I guess I just feel lucky that I've been able to, keep going to the source, and finding new inspiration, and so success to me, I guess now more is just like, just being able to say that I've always stayed true to my muse, in a way that I feel like I've seen a lot of people compromise those things, and sometimes to their benefit, and more often than not, they end up, completely losing their connection.